My true story. From Florida, they said, Mom needs rest, then drove me to a facility and vanished with the deed. But I knew the one thing they didn't. My husband left me a backup will. It looked like a clinic. It felt like a cage. They thought I was asleep. It's always the first mistake people make about the elderly. They assume silence means surrender. But silence is a kind of listening. And I had been listening, motionless under the thin hospital blanket, while their voices sliced through the wall like blades wrapped in honey. She started talking to the cats again, Greg, my daughter Jen whispered. Her voice had that edge I'd heard too often lately. That's a sign, isn't it? Before she bites someone or sets the kitchen on fire. Don't you think it's time? Greg, always so eager to be part of the conversation, replied, Honestly, we should have done this a year ago. She's sitting on a pile of assets and has no clue how to manage them. If we don't act now, we're idiots. Come on, Jen said. You saw the mail last week. She donated to some random animal rescue. $500 for a blind dog named Butterscotch? They both laughed. I didn't move. I focused on the sound of their footsteps shuffling closer to the door. She doesn't remember what year it is half the time, Greg continued. And her handwriting looks like chicken scratch. That's documented cognitive decline. We just need the doctor to sign off, Jen said. She'll be in the system before the week's out. A third voice joined them then. A woman, older than Jen but younger than me, with that clinical tone that doesn't belong to anyone's mother. Is she still lucid? Jen scoffed. She called me by her sister's name yesterday. Aunt Lila died in 2009. She forgot to turn off the stove, Greg added, and she told the nurse she talks to my father, who's been gone for 3 years. I wanted to sit up, scream, I never said that, but I knew better. I stayed still. We've locked up the meds, Jen said, and we're having the will sealed. Once she's fully admitted, we can manage her estate as needed. And if anyone asks, Greg said smoothly, we just tell them she confuses names, forgets faces. That's enough. The third voice responded flatly. It's not illegal if it's in her best interest. I didn't sleep that night. The room they left me in was white, blindingly white. The overhead lights hummed like electricity on a fence line. There was no window, just a pale yellow curtain over a wall that hid nothing. No clock, no calendar, no way to tell how many days had passed since I was dragged from my home with a packed bag and too many promises. The bed had metal rails, cold even through the blanket. A camera blinked red in the upper corner. I stared at it until my eyes watered. Every few hours a nurse came in, never the same one twice. They handed me pills in a paper cup, watched as I swallowed, then left without a word. I kept the pills under my tongue, spit them into tissues, and hid them beneath the mattress. I wasn't going to let them fog my brain again. The hallway outside echoed with quiet suffering. A woman 2 rooms down cried out every night, calling for a daughter who never came. Someone further down coughed constantly, wet, rattling, like the end of something. I never saw their faces. Once I asked the nurse what day it was. She smiled in that way people do when they don't want to tell the truth and said, It's Tuesday, I think, or maybe Thursday? She didn't check. She didn't care. They gave me a book to read, large print, the kind they hand out at airport terminals or waiting rooms. I flipped through the pages, didn't read a single line. I was too busy listening, watching, remembering. I remembered everything. The day Greg first mentioned streamlining my accounts, the way Jen had started saying our house instead of your house, the look on her face when I said no to dividing the property. It had changed from pity to something else, something colder, sharper. Now I understood. They hadn't brought me here to recover. They had brought me here to vanish. My body was accounted for, but everything else, my rights, my voice, my past, had been scrubbed clean. I was to be observed, medicated, managed. My only job now was to forget. But I wasn't going to. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was the pretending. Each nurse who called me sweetie while holding a clipboard full of lies. Each orderly who smiled while ignoring my requests for a phone. Each locked door, each scripted meal, each time they changed my clothes without asking. On the third night, I made a decision. I pulled the thin blanket up to my chin, closed my eyes, and said nothing. When they checked my vitals, I smiled faintly and asked if Henry had been fed. Henry wasn't real. Or maybe he was. A cat I'd imagined during the loneliest days. Either way, the nurse nodded and made a note in my chart. She's declining, I heard one say later. She's losing touch. Good. Let them believe I was slipping. Let them build their case. I would let them underestimate me all the way to their own ruin, but in the meantime, I would wait, quietly, like a seed buried in winter. And when the moment came, I would remember how to bloom. When John died, Jen held me like a child holds on to the last light in a room going dark. "You're my hero, Mom," she whispered into my shoulder. "You always were." I remember her trembling in my arms, and I remember thinking, at least I still have her. The funeral passed like a gentle wave, quiet, respectful, just as John would have wanted. Jen gave a tearful eulogy. Greg stood beside her with his arm around her waist, the perfect picture of a grieving son-in-law. He didn't notice then how tightly he held her, like he already owned something. It started slowly. Greg offered to help with the bills. "Just until things settle," he said. He spoke the language of numbers, charts, portfolios, passive income. I didn't understand all of it, but I knew enough to feel the shift. Then came the questions about the house. "It's too big for you now, don't you think? You could simplify. Have you considered dividing it among the grandkids? Make things tidy." "Tidy," I repeated, staring at him. "This house is not a document, Greg. It's where your wife took her first steps, where her father died in his own bed. It stays as it is." He smiled, said nothing more. But I saw him share a look with Jen across the room. She used to call this place her sanctuary, but suddenly she was pointing out the steep stairs, the drafty windows. She brought pamphlets for retirement communities and left them on my table without a word. When I asked about them, she said, "I'm just thinking ahead." Then, over tea one Sunday, she looked me in the eye and said, "Mom, we need to talk about the will." "What about it?" "It's outdated. Things have changed. You should be fair to the grandkids." I set down my cup. "This house was built by your father's hands. It goes to who he trusted, me, and I'll decide what happens after." Her eyes cooled. That was the moment I saw it. The line between concern and calculation, it had blurred in her gaze. She still kissed me on the cheek, still called me Mom, but the way she looked at me was no longer love, it was strategy. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday. Jen had brought over a pie, store-bought, though she tried to pass it off as homemade, and Greg was carrying a manila folder under his arm. "Just a few things to go over," he said, too casually. I should have known better than to let them talk in the study alone. But I was tired that day, and grief has a way of dulling your instincts. I told them I was going to lie down upstairs. Instead, I stopped halfway up the staircase, just out of sight, and sat on the step like I used to when I was little, listening to grown-ups argue past bedtime. What I heard was not an argument. It was something colder. "She gave $50 to a homeless man outside the grocery store last week," Jen said. "Said he looked like someone she used to know." Greg laughed. "Perfect. That's emotional instability and impaired judgment. Keep writing this down." "I did," she replied. "I've got a whole list. Forgot the date twice last month, called the neighbor's dog by Dad's name, left the stove on." "She's lonely," the third voice said. It belonged to a man I didn't recognize. Firm, clinical, the kind that wears expensive shoes and calls it advice. "But that's not enough. If you want conservatorship, you need a cognitive decline narrative, mild to moderate, something sympathetic but concerning." Jen sighed. "She's getting there. She repeats herself, tells the same stories, still thinks Dad's old lawyer is her emergency contact." "She writes everything down," Greg added, "still keeps a planner. I've tried to get her to go digital, no luck." "That's a good thing," the man said. "If she miswrites something, it's another point of evidence." My blood turned cold. I leaned forward slightly, careful not to creak the step. "We can push for a physician's evaluation next month," the man continued, "but you'll need emotional leverage. Make it sound like you're protecting her. Use words like safety, stability, comfort. Judges eat that up." Greg chuckled. "She's always been private. Won't even let us in the safe. Does she have a will?" Jen hesitated. "An old one. Everything goes to me. But she's been talking about changing it. Wants to start a scholarship or something ridiculous." The man responded flatly. "Then now's the time to act. One signature, and you'll have medical authority. From there you can lock down finances, freeze her accounts, and manage her estate. And if she fights back? She won't, Jen said confidently. She trusts me. I stood slowly, my knees aching, my heart pounding. I went to my room, locked the door, and pulled out the old tape recorder from the bottom drawer of my dresser. It still had batteries. I tested the button, clicked once, heard the whir. It worked. I placed it in the pocket of my cardigan. From that moment on, I recorded everything. Over the next week, I played my part. I asked Jen the same question twice, on purpose. I told Greg I thought the postman looked like someone from high school. I even forgot to take the trash out on Tuesday. They watched me like hawks, smiled wider every time I slipped. I recorded the dinner where they asked me again to sign updated financial paperwork. I recorded Jen explaining that we're just trying to make sure everything's in order, Mom, in case something happens. I recorded Greg saying, it's not about control, it's about peace of mind for everyone. I said little, just nodded and reached for more potatoes, but inside I was burning. I kept the recorder in my sweater during walks around the block, during appointments, during casual chats over coffee. I changed batteries every 3 days and labeled each cassette 1A, -3, -4B, 1B, 1A, -60, one afternoon. They thought I was slipping. I was building a case. One afternoon, I caught them in my office again. Greg had his hand on my filing cabinet. When I stepped in, he smiled, looking for envelopes. You must think I'm a fool, I said quietly. He blinked. What? I said. I repeated, stepping closer. You must think I'm a fool, that I don't notice when my drawers are moved, that I don't know what's missing. Jen appeared behind him. Mom, please. Don't be paranoid. I'm not paranoid, I said. I'm awake. They looked at each other, and I smiled. That night, I rewound the tapes and listened to them whisper about my decline, their rehearsed lines, their desperate attempts to frame me as fragile. I was many things, but I was not fragile. The next morning, I called Amy, the only staff member at my clinic I still trusted. I told her I needed her help, but not yet. I needed her to watch, to listen, to believe in the day I would need someone outside this house to believe me. She promised. By the end of the week, I had 3 full tapes, 2 backup recordings, and the number of John's old lawyer, Howard Greeley, scribbled on a note and hidden behind the kitchen vent. Because they were building a file on me, and I was building one on them. They wanted to say I was losing my mind, but what I was really doing was preparing for war. Henry was a stray cat, gray with white paws and the cautious eyes of something that had been hurt before. He started showing up on my porch in the mornings, always sitting just close enough to watch, never to touch. I talked to him when I watered the roses. Just simple things, the weather, the news, my tea preferences. It made me feel less alone, but apparently speaking out loud to a cat meant I was ready for institutionalization. Jen caught me once, standing by the door with a saucer of milk. She didn't say anything at first, just watched. Then she smiled, too tight. Mom, you do know he can't answer you, right? Of course, I replied, but he listens better than most people. The next day, a man arrived at the house. He didn't knock like a guest or announce himself like a doctor. He simply walked in, with Jen and Greg trailing behind him. They told me he was Dr. Morris, a geriatric cognitive wellness consultant. He looked young, maybe early 40s, with soft hands and a clipboard too clean. We just want to check in, Mrs. Miller, he said. Make sure everything's all right upstairs. Everything's fine, I said. It's what's downstairs I'm concerned about. He chuckled, like that answer was proof of something. He sat across from me in the living room, legs crossed, notebook open. Do you know what day it is? He asked. Yes, I answered, but I don't feel like playing along today. He wrote something down. Who's the president? He asked. Temporarily? I raised an eyebrow, more scribbles. Do you ever feel like people are watching you? There's a security camera at the front door, I said. Greg installed it. Without asking, Jen cut in quickly. Mom's been paranoid lately. She talks about being followed, says the neighbors are listening through the walls. I said Greg was, I corrected. Not the neighbors. Dr. Morse leaned forward slightly. Have you had any trouble with your memory, Malice? I remember the names of every betrayal that's walked through this house. He looked at Jen. She's been confused, forgetting things, talking to animals. She's lonely, Greg added. We're just trying to help her get the support she needs. After 20 minutes of questions designed to box me in, Dr. Morris stood. Given the family's concern and her recent behaviors, I believe a short-term care placement is appropriate just to observe and assess. Jen nodded quickly. We've already found a place, Greg added. Private, comfortable, highly rated. I turned to Jen. You're putting me away. She knelt beside me like I was a child. It's not forever, Mom. Just some rest. You'll have your own room. You won't have to worry about anything anymore. She kissed my cheek. I didn't move. They packed my things while I sat still on the couch. My Bible, a nightgown, my slippers, a sweater with holes in the cuffs. The ride was quiet. I sat in the back seat. Jen drove. Greg stared at his phone. The road stretched long and flat, palm trees lining the shoulders like soldiers watching a funeral. After half an hour I asked, "Where are we going?" Jen kept her eyes on the road. "Somewhere safe." "That's not a place," I said. "That's a sales pitch." Greg sighed. "It's a facility, Palm Glen. You'll like it. They have a garden." "I have a garden," I snapped. "You'll be comfortable," Jen said. "You'll be taken care of." I looked out the window. The sun was setting over a warehouse district. Rusted fences, barbed wire, flat roofs. There was no ocean, no garden, no comfort. "Where are we going?" I whispered. Jen didn't answer. Greg did. "To a place where you don't have to worry anymore." We pulled into a long driveway. Beige buildings, no windows on the lower floors. A sign, Palm Glen Wellness. A locked gate, 2 security cameras, 1 nurse waiting in the doorway with a clipboard. I didn't get out at first. Jen opened my door. "Come on, Mom." I turned slowly, looked her dead in the eyes. "You're not saving me," I said. "You're storing me." She didn't reply. Inside, the floors were polished, the walls were pale green, the lights were too bright. They asked for my purse, my ID, my phone. "I didn't bring it," I said. "That's all right." The nurse smiled. "You won't need it here." They led me down a hall with no exit signs, no windows, no clocks. My room had a bed, a chair, and a drawer I wasn't allowed to lock. They gave me a schedule. I wasn't allowed to keep it. That night I stared at the ceiling and whispered, "Henry, I hope someone fed you," and I prayed that memory would be enough to survive what was coming. The door to my room did not have a lock on the inside, but it did have one on the outside. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was that the window didn't open, not even a crack. The third was the phone mounted to the hallway wall behind a plexiglass case, labeled "Staff Use Only." My room had a single bed with metal rails, a bolted-down chair, and a dresser with no drawers. There was a panic button near the pillow, but it was the kind that brought sedation, not rescue. I was not in a wellness center. I was in a cage. Every morning a nurse named Sheila brought me pills in a paper cup and waited until I swallowed. She watched my throat like a prison guard. When I asked what they were, she smiled. "Just something to keep your thoughts soft." I did not want soft thoughts. I wanted sharp ones. The first night, I cried out in my sleep, not because of a nightmare, because I remembered what Jen had said before they brought me here. "You'll be taken care of," the way someone says they've found a shelter for a stray dog. I woke up yelling, calling her name. 2 nurses rushed in. They pressed me down against the bed, muttering about hallucinations and paranoia. Sheila injected something into my arm before I could explain. I remember one word, delusional, as the ceiling spun. When I woke up, my wrists were strapped to the bed rails. "You had a bad episode," Sheila said sweetly. "Just a precaution." I asked to call my lawyer. She said, "There's no need." I asked to call my daughter. She said, "She'll check in soon." I asked to go outside. She said, "It's not safe." Later that week, I heard Greg's voice outside my room. I recognized the smirk in it before I saw him. He was talking to someone, maybe the administrator, maybe a nurse. "She's always written everything down," he said. "Journals, lists, letters to dead people. None of it means anything." "What do you plan to do with her belongings?" the voice asked. Greg chuckled. "When the time comes, I'll burn every last word. The will, the notes, everything. She won't even exist on paper." I held my breath until he left. That night I tore a piece of paper from the back of my welcome packet, the one listing cafeteria hours and group therapy rules. I stole a golf pencil from the recreation room, and with shaking hands, I wrote the only name and number that mattered. Howard Greeley, John's old friend, the lawyer he trusted when no one else would do. I folded the paper, wrapped it in the lining of a tissue, and tucked it into my sock. 2 days later, during bed check, Sheila found it. "What's this?" she asked, unfolding the tissue. "A prayer," I said. She read it, paused. "A lawyer?" she said. "Why?" "He helped bury my husband," I replied. "I'd like him to help bury me too." She didn't laugh. She confiscated the note and left. I felt the walls close in tighter, but I still had one chance. The next morning I wrote it again, smaller this time, on a corner of the bathroom paper liner. I rolled it into a sliver and wrapped it in bread during breakfast. Then I swallowed it. No one saw. No one cared. Later that afternoon, I faked nausea, asked to lie down in the infirmary. A younger nurse, someone I hadn't seen before, helped me. Her name was Amy. She had soft eyes. When she leaned over to tuck the blanket under my arms, I whispered, "Can you keep a secret?" She looked at me for a long second, then nodded. "I need you to help me get a message out. A number, that's all." She nodded again. That night, I forced myself to vomit into the bathroom sink. The paper came up, still intact. I rinsed it, dried it, placed it in a bandage wrapper. Amy found it during her shift change. She didn't say a word, she just took it. The next morning, the pills came again. The hallway still had no windows. The camera still blinked red, but I sat on the bed, back straight, hands folded. Because now the world beyond the walls might finally know. They had locked the doors, locked the meds, planned to burn the will, but they hadn't locked my memory, and they hadn't broken my will. There is a kind of silence only found in places built to forget you. It hung in the air like dust in my room at Palm Glen, thick, invisible, settling into every wrinkle and breath. The nurses came and went, the lights never dimmed. The meals arrived on time but tasted of nothing, and every time I asked to use a phone or speak with someone from outside, I got the same answer, "Not right now, Malice." So I stopped asking. Instead I watched, listened, waited, and I remembered. They say the elderly forget, that we slip, that we wander, but the truth is, we carry too much. We don't forget. We just grow quieter about the remembering. I remembered every word Jen had said, every document Greg had touched, every look of pity turned into calculation, and I remembered John's voice in my head, steady as ever. "If anything goes wrong, find Howard. Howard Greeley, the only man John ever trusted with our will." The number was etched in my mind, the digits burned behind my eyelids each night. But memory alone wouldn't save me. Amy was the first person who looked at me like I was still whole. She was young, barely old enough to drink, a nursing student finishing her clinicals. She came in for the night shift, always around 7:15, always with a clipboard and a quick smile. One evening, as she helped change my sheets, she leaned close and whispered, "I know you're not gone." I didn't respond, not at first. I wasn't sure it was safe. But the next night, I waited until the hallway was quiet. Then I whispered back, "I need your help." Amy nodded once. "What do you need?" "Paper," I said. "Something to write on, and something to write with." She hesitated. "Let me check everything." "Then bring nothing you need back." She returned the following evening with a strip of torn notepad and the back of a broken pen, slid them under my pillow without a word. That night, I wrote with the steadiness of someone who had been silent too long. To Mr. Howard Greeley, my name is Malice Miller. I am the widow of John Miller. I am being held without legal cause at Palm Glen Wellness Facility. My daughter and her husband orchestrated this detainment under false medical pretenses to gain control of my estate. I am of sound mind. I need your help. Please do not forget me, Malice. I folded the note 3 times. Amy came in at shift change. She tucked it into her sleeve. We said nothing. The next few days dragged like years. I went back to playing the part, confused, compliant, slow to respond. I asked who the president was. I forgot the date on purpose. I asked if Henry, the imaginary cat, had been fed. The staff nodded sympathetically and made notes on their clipboards. I wasn't worried about their notes. I was worried about the letter. Had it made it out? Had Amy sent it? Was Howard still alive? Would he remember me? Would he believe me? Some nights I doubted everything. Other nights I sat up in bed, repeating every word I'd written until they lived in my bones. I am of sound mind. I am of sound mind. I am of sound mind. And then, one Tuesday afternoon, something shifted. Amy walked past my room with a stack of linens and didn't stop. But as she passed, she dropped a single paper napkin onto the floor. I waited 5 minutes before picking it up. On the underside, written in the corner in tiny block letters, were 4 words. Letter delivered. He's coming. I stared at the napkin until the words blurred. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I just breathed. I had survived the silence. Now someone else knew. I was no longer forgotten, and I was not done remembering. It happened on a Thursday morning. I knew something was different the moment the nurses started whispering. The halls buzzed with a nervous energy I hadn't felt since I arrived at Palm Glen. Doors opened and closed faster, a clipboard dropped. Then came the sound of heels, confident, sharp, not medical. Amy slipped into my room without a word. She didn't smile. She just handed me a cardigan I hadn't seen in weeks. My own, the blue one with John's initials stitched on the inside, and whispered, "They're here." Outside my windowless room, the world had cracked open. A camera crew stood in the main hallway. A tall woman with a Channel 7 mic pinned to her jacket was speaking directly into the lens. Behind her, I saw 2 sheriff's deputies and, just behind them, Howard Greeley. He looked older, but his eyes were exactly as I remembered, sharp, kind, and unafraid. The director of Palm Glen was red-faced, flanked by staff who suddenly didn't know where to look. "I'm here for Malice Miller," Howard said, voice calm but firm. "We've submitted a petition for her immediate release under elder abuse protection statutes. I have legal authority and evidence of unlawful confinement." The reporter turned to her cameraman. "Roll on that." They escorted me into the common area, 1 chair, a fake plant, and 3 cameras. I sat, weak in body but straight-backed. Amy stood behind me, her hands lightly resting on my shoulders. Howard placed a recorder on the table. This device contains multiple conversations between Malice's daughter, Jennifer Miller, and her son-in-law, Gregory Hayes. In these recordings, they explicitly plan to fabricate symptoms of dementia in order to seize control of Malice's estate. The sheriff nodded. "We've reviewed them." The reporter leaned forward. "Mrs. Miller, do you remember making these recordings?" "I remember everything," I said. And I meant it. A door slammed. Jen appeared, breathless and pale, dragging Greg by the wrist. "What is going on?" she demanded. "She's ill. She's confused. She's been making things up for months." "She's my mother," Jen shouted. "You're all believing the ramblings of a senile old woman?" I stood slowly. Amy helped me. I pulled a folded page from my pocket. My handwriting, my history. "I remember," I said, voice shaking but steady. "The day my daughter was born. I remember holding her as she cried through heartbreaks and victories. I remember every time she called me a hero." I unfolded the paper. "I remember the day she looked at me and saw a burden instead." Jen's face crumpled. I continued. "I remember her saying, 'We'll take care of you, Mom,' and then signing the paper to have me locked away. I remember the names of every doctor she convinced. I remember what she tried to take." The room was silent except for the click of the camera. "I may be old," I said, "but I am not gone." I looked directly at my daughter. "What's right," I said, "never requires locking a door on your own mother." And with that, I stepped outside into the light. The house hadn't changed much. The paint had chipped a little more near the porch steps and the mailbox leaned slightly to one side, but everything else was just as I remembered. The gate opened with a groan, as if even it had missed me. And when I stepped over the threshold, I swear the floorboards sighed under my feet, not from age but from relief. I was home. The sheriff's department had already been through Jen and Greg's house. Bank accounts were frozen, transactions flagged. The beach property they'd started remodeling was under federal investigation. Their attorney had nothing to say once the recordings went public. There was no version of the story where they came out looking like anything but what they were, calculated, greedy, and cruel. The media called it elder abuse. The neighbors called it shameful. I called it over. I walked through my house slowly, touching everything, the corners of picture frames, the grooves in the banister, the dining table where I'd once braided Jen's hair while she cried over math homework. In the kitchen, the glass cookie jar was still there, empty, but whole. I washed it and filled it with new cookies. Chocolate chip, my favorite, not hers. The next morning I stood on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the sun rise over the same street I'd seen for 40 years. Mrs. Clark from across the way waved. She brought over muffins an hour later and said, "You look like you've seen war." "I came back from one," I replied. Mr. Henley next door offered to fix the leaning mailbox. I let him, not because I couldn't do it, but because I didn't want to lift a hammer that week. I had earned the right to rest. I spent my days pruning the garden. The roses had suffered under neglect, thorns wild, petals wilted, but they were still alive, like me. I planted a new bush, red and defiant, right in front of the window Jen used to climb out of during high school. Inside, I sorted through the boxes they hadn't touched. Old journals, letters, John's cufflinks, a photo of Jen in her graduation cap, smiling at me like I was the only thing in the world she needed. I kept it. I kept all of it, not because she deserved it, but because I did. One afternoon, I stood at the security panel by the front door. The code was still Jen's birthday. I erased it. I entered a new one, 1946, the year I was born. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror that evening, the same one I'd stared into for decades. My face was older, yes, more lines, more softness in the cheeks. But the eyes had never changed. They were mine. They were clear. I leaned in, rested a hand on the cool porcelain, and said softly to my reflection, "They thought I was a burden, but I am memory, and memory never dies." If this story touched something in you, if you've ever seen a mother overlooked, a grandmother dismissed, or a quiet woman underestimated, then you already know. Malice's story isn't rare. It's just rarely told, because when women like Malice suffer, they do so quietly. They are polite about their pain. They are respectful in their fear. They remember not to speak too loudly, not to make a fuss, not to be a burden. But this story, this one, you've just heard it. And now it lives in you. Malice didn't fight with fists. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She fought the only way she could, with clarity, with the stubborn, steady kind of love that doesn't leave, even when everyone else does. She fought by staying alive when they tried to erase her. She fought by remembering when they told her she was losing her mind. She fought by writing, by listening, by recording the truth they hoped no one would ever hear. And in the end, it wasn't anger that saved her. It wasn't even justice, not in the way we often imagine it. It was truth. Cold, quiet, undeniable truth. That's what broke the lock. That's what brought her home. That's what burned down the story they tried to build around her, that she was frail, confused, irrelevant. Because she wasn't any of those things. She was strong. She was aware. She was watching. And she never once forgot who she was. Now, let's talk about what happened after the cameras turned off. Malice did return to her house. She did plant new roses. She did change the gate code. But she also started something more. She began speaking at town halls, small gatherings at first, with folding chairs and styrofoam cups of coffee. She shared her story with senior groups, with caregivers, with daughters who feared they might become their mothers one day, and with sons who had no idea what their silence was costing. And every time she spoke, someone in the room cried, not just for her, but for themselves. Because Malice's story is about betrayal, yes, but it's also about survival. It's about dignity, about the thin line between help and harm, and how quickly love can curdle into control when no one's watching. Malice is not just one woman. She is thousands. She is your neighbor, your aunt, your mother. One day, she may be you. And if her story did anything, let it be this. Let it make you look again. At the way we talk to older women. At the way we assume they don't know better, can't remember, or shouldn't have a say. At the way we reduce them to their medications, their routines, their decline. Let it make you ask, who is protecting them when no one else is? Because if it weren't for one brave nurse, one stubborn memory, and one forgotten lawyer's number scribbled on the back of a napkin, Malice might have disappeared. erased from her own life, signed away by the very hands she once held through nightmares and fever. Instead, she stands now in her own doorway, sunlight on her face, wind in her hair. The house is hers again, the garden is growing, and somewhere in a dusty drawer that original will still lives, untouched, unburned, still bearing her name. So thank you. Thank you for walking this long road with her, for sitting with the pain, for not looking away, for hearing her voice when others told her to stay quiet. If you believe stories like Malice's deserve to be told and remembered, then subscribe to Grandma True Stories, because there are more like hers, many more. And the world may try to silence us, may try to shame us, lock us away, or rewrite our endings. But here, we write our stories back into the world. Here, we say the quiet part out loud, because revenge has no expiration date, and when a grandma speaks, the world listens.